welcome everyone to the fifth of our CG conference webinars. And this is the second last in the series, and it's great to have you all with us. We've got a very interesting topic today, the public good, and that may be one reason why we have a large number of people who have come into the webinar. I'm just about to share screen with you, if I can bring it up. Our speakers today are Rajani Naidoo and Futao Huang. Rajani is co-presenting with Talita Calitz, but Talita will, I think, if we can bring her back onto line, which has been a problem, Talita will be able to ask and answer questions. Rajani will do the main presentation. Rajani and Talita's session will go for the first 30 minutes. And we'll include some Q&A, so be prepared to ask your questions in the chat. And then we'll switch across to Futao Huang from Japan, who will speak in the second half of the webinar, and again speak followed by Q&A. Well, the public good of higher education is a great topic, and I've got a suitable graphic for you, which if I can bring it up. I'm sorry to hold this up. Here we are. At last. No, I can't seem to find it. Never mind. Well, screen share is not working in my favor. What I wanted to do was say it was Bastille Day. Bastille Day was the day that the assembled people of Paris overthrew the regime main prison in Paris, the Bastille, and kick-started the French Revolution. And I suppose it draws attention to the core question about the public good. Whose public good are we talking about? And there are different takes on the public good. To help us into that question, Rajani Naidoo is the Director of the International Centre for Higher Education Management at the University of Bath. And she's also a visiting professor at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Her co-presenter, Talita Calitz, is a senior lecturer at the Department of Education and Management and Policy Studies at the University of Pretoria. In the second half of our webinar, we'll hear from Futao Huang. Futao Huang is the Professor of Higher Education at the Research Institute for Higher Education at Hiroshima University. But without any further delay, and I promise to not struggle around for any more missing PowerPoints, let me hand over to Rajani. Hello, we've lost Rajani. Oh, this is what we thought could happen because we were having trouble with the connection back to Bath. Now, I think in this situation, what we'll do is we'll go straight to Futao. Futao, I can see you. Are you ready to start your part of the webinar? Excellent. Well, be most welcome. Futao is one of the researchers affiliated with the Centre for Global Higher Education, and his project is the project on the public good role of higher education, and he's conducted 2 sets of interviews in Japan, and today he's going to talk to us about one of those sets of interviews. Over to you, Futao.
Thank you, Simon, and hello everyone. And it's a great pleasure to talk to you about my recent findings based on Project 1.1. I'd like to use slides to show you some of the key points and also an outlining of my talk. Simon, is this clear?
Yeah, I can see it, Futao.
Okay, thank you very much. And my title is very simple because of the limit of time. I cannot talk too much. I will focus on public goods in Japan's higher education based on main findings from Project 1.1. As some of you know that I'm involved in 2 projects. One is the Project 1.1 and the other is the Project 1.2. And I'm assuming I shall only have about 15 minutes to talk about this topic. So the main purpose of this talk will be about the analysis and discussion of the activity of Japan's higher education as a public goods based on main findings from semi-structured interviews with 17 persons based on the outline of the project. I will show you more details of the interviews later. So I will focus on two broad research questions. The first is, what do higher education and research contribute to the public? The second is, can we measure that contribution? Since last year, I think it's in the late March 2019, and I talked about how the phrase, the public good of higher education in Japan, was understood by a dozen of interviews. So I will focus on these two questions, and as I mentioned earlier, concentrate on analysis and discussion of the practice and activities of the contributions made by Japan's higher education. And I'd like to start with a very brief explanation of the terminology. In Japan, and there's a Chinese character, which is equivalent to the English phrase public good. We call it as the kokyuzai, but very little discussion has been made about the meaning of the phrase. And in most of the cases, the term in Japanese only conveys economic nuisance based on Sam Mason's definition. And since in most of the cases, the contributions made by Japan's universities, especially national universities, are largely determined by the law and the Japanese government documents. I'd like to share you some of the key points relating to the missions of Japan's higher education. I will not talk too much. And here is a very important law, and which was amended recently. According to Article 83, it clears implies for the missions of Japan's higher education. It mentions that as a center of scholarship, for example, and the university aims to transmit knowledge widely, teach and research in-depth and professional studies, and cultivate students' intellectual, moral, and applied abilities. So I think all these statements are directly concerned with what is called published contributions made by Japan's university. And as a matter of fact, the missions and the roles of Japan's national universities have changed consequently. So I just pick up the key points. I'd like to tell you about what was happened in the late 19th century when Japan built its first modern university. This is the University of Tokyo. According to the regulation at that time, the Imperial University aimed to teach academic skills and arts that meet the needs of a nation. I think the phrase highlighted in red color is very important, which is quite different from what is going on in terms of missions and roles of Japan's national university. At that time, you can see that the purpose of the contribution made by national universities was to serve for the nation. After World War II, impacted by US educational philosophy, national university played key roles in providing democratic and mass higher education for general public. This is, I think this is sort of progressive. I mean, the idea of higher education, which came from the United States, ensuring equal access to higher education. You can see this statement are quite different from what happened in the late 19th century. And in 2012, the Central Education Council is a very important consultant agency, which is affiliated to the Ministry of Education, emphasized that the National University plays important roles in facilitating high-level academic research, producing talents based on national planning, contributing to regional activation through its nationally balanced placements, and ensuring equal opportunity for education, university education. And the phrase, which is highlighted in red color, is also a new mission, which is expected to be played by National University. And last year, that is last year, the Ministry of Education requested that the National University should play decisive roles in facilitating teaching research in leading knowledge of Japan and the world, being a hub for creating innovative knowledge and talents. This is a new request made by the Japanese government for national universities. And as a center of regional teaching and research, it should contribute to not only the equal opportunity for higher education at the national level, but also pulling out the potential of each region and regional revitalization. Together, we can see a third new mission, which is expected by the government for national university. That is, it was asked to play a unique role in passing on the baton knowledge that human beings have accumulated to the next generation. So we can find that changes have occurred in the missions and the roles of national universities since the later century. National universities have been expected to play more diverse missions and roles. This is a broad background in which we have taken semi-structured interviews with 17 key persons. As shown in table 1, we have 2 key persons from Ministry of Education and 2 presidents from Japan's national research associations, and 8 key persons from a leading university, which was founded in the 19th century. And it is also ranked among the top 5 in Japan, also one of the best global universities according to several major university ranking system. And 5 key persons from a local comprehensive university. Of course, both are national universities. I mean, the local comprehensive university was established soon after the Second World War. So we have 2 different case studies. And also we have several deans, academics coming from contrasting disciplines. And they come from Faculty of Engineering, Faculty of Economics, and several of them come from linguistics and cultural. So I share you with our main findings, focusing on 2 research questions, which I just mentioned. Regarding the first research question, that is, what do higher education research contribute to the public good or public goods? We have did all these interviews, and we cleaned the data, and we made a summary of the main key points, and the main findings will be summarized as follows. And first, producing manpower, fostering and building talent. I think it can also be found in maybe in other system of countries, but within this title, there are several ideas or observations. For example, two of our interviews emphasize that Japan's national university emphasize much more on the production of professionals. For example, most of the government offices and the big company presidents and managers graduate from faculties of law or economics. The professional knowledge and the abilities acquired in university can help them administrate and manage the country and their company in a professional way. This is very important. And also, 2 of our interviews emphasize the importance of contribution made by National University in cultivating citizen and developing active citizenship. And for the first research question, we have other findings. For example, one of our interviews mentioned that one of the important mentions of a comprehensive university is the second case study is to preserve and transmit knowledge, which might not be popular for the moment or among students, because this knowledge might become useful in 30 years or the future. This is just the higher education could contribute to the public good, especially in case it is true in case of national university. And one more interview mentioned that although professional education, especially in teachers and medical science, is important, education in linguistics and culture can also contribute to the public good by teaching students with professional knowledge that cannot be learned from other disciplines. So you can find that although a focus is placed on the importance of contribution made by national university in terms of producing talents, there are several different perspectives made by our interviews. The second point, the second important contributions made by national university is undertaking innovative research. And what is impressive in the findings made from our interviews with these key persons is that many of our interviews emphasize the importance of conducting new research, that is innovative research, especially made by national university compared to the other 2 different sectors of university. One is the private university and the other is a local public university in the Japanese context. And you can find all these points. For example, fostering talents for the next generation, producing knowledge for the welfare of human beings, and undertaking genetic activities to pursue truth is very important. And these are 2 important contributions made by national university based on teaching and research activities. Also, several of our interviews stressed the importance of direct contributions made by national university through their teaching and research activities, regardless of difference in academics disciplines and fields. For example, we interviewed with several academics coming with different academic backgrounds. One of the interviews came from engineering, and he said, my discipline is industrial chemistry, and is directly concerned with technology development. So I can use my research outputs to contribute to the society directly. And even in the case of economics, one of our interviews emphasized, although my field is economic geography, I can also make a contribution to national landing improvement directly, especially for regional revitalization. So these are the 3 broad contributions made by national universities in relation to public goods based on our interviews. Regarding the second research question, we also have 3 main broad findings. The first answer from our interviews is some can be measured while others cannot. One of our interviews coming from Ministry of Education told us that in nowadays, we could almost predicate almost all the impacts made by research on the changes in society in Japan for the next 20 or even 30 years. And several of our mentioned that although some of the contribution could be measured in a quantitative way, but in most of the cases that cannot be measured in a quantitative way. They also illustrated several reasons. For example, some of the contributions seem to be a long-term effect, which cannot be easily measured in a quantitative way. And some of the contributions should be it's like contributions made in cultivating citizen or producing active citizenship cannot be easily measured in existing quantitative indicators. This is the first main finding from our interviews. The second finding is it's very difficult to measure that contribution, which is a little similar to the previous finding. Three of our interviews emphasized it is extremely difficult to measure that contribution in a qualitative way because they are contributions that cannot be measured according to data or objective indicators. And the third finding we could confirm from the interviews that there's no need to measure that contribution. And one of the two presidents from Japan's national research associations even mentioned that the contribution made by university should not be measured. And two of our interviews mentioned that it is not necessary to measure that contribution lies can't be measured because a long-term effect of higher education compensates of a contribution. So these are the main findings from our interviews with 17 key persons based on project point 1 and 1. So I'd like to conclude my talk by presenting the following points. First, although few discussions on public goods in higher education are made in Japan compared to many Western countries like the UK or United States, both the law and national documents clearly stipulate the key missions and the roles of national university that are concerned with public goods in Japan's higher education. Second, as the government has facilitated a functional stratification of national universities recently, as I share you based on some government documents, national universities have contributed to the public good in more diverse ways, and more difference are expected to emerge between national universities in this regard during the process of the ongoing functional stratification requested by the central government. The last point, final point is, in practice, all the interviews believe that the Japanese higher education has made good contributions to the public good, although clear difference were also found in the understanding of activities or practice seen as contributing to the public good and the measurement of that public good. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you very much, Futao, and thank you for coming in unexpectedly, as the first speaker. I'm going to start the short discussion by asking you a question which is what you might say from left field. Let's see if I can bring up this PowerPoint now.
I will show you. What page?
Can you see my screen, Futao?
Yeah. No problem.
Now, this is significant for the 14th of July, which is today. Bastille Day in France, Bastille Day in the world, really. 1789, the people of Paris revolted against the regime. Now, my question is, who decides what the public good is? You know, is it the state or is it someone else? And the reason why I raise this is because in the context of the universities and higher education, it can be one or the other. I mean, if you asked our Vice-Chancellor, University of Oxford, who defines what the public good is, she would probably give a careful answer, but I don't think that she would steer the public good role of the university according to what the minister was saying. Whereas in some other systems, it's more unquestionable that government decides what the public good is and what the mission of the university should be in response to that. What's the case in Japan? I mean, the impression I'm getting from your presentation is that the state or government's idea of what the public good is followed more or less unquestionably by the universities. Is that right?
Yeah, and as you know, Simon, and we have questions about for these points, and we ask our interviews about their observations of who should control the public good, who should define public goods. Because in the limit of time, I cannot share our findings on that point. In most of the cases, and as a matter of fact, almost all of our interviews emphasize that the public goods made by Japanese higher education seem to be limited in research, or in most cases to social engagement through their teaching and research activities, which is quite different from many Western countries. And if public goods could be divided into two broad categories, one is classical public good, and the other is modern, or we call it progressive public goods. In Japan, and before the Second World War, and the public good of higher education was solely determined by the central government, as I just showed you. But since the Second World War, because Japan was impacted by the United States, so the new, or the second, or I call it the progressive public good, which focused on, for example, ensuring equal opportunity to higher education, university education, has also emerged in Japan. So in Japan, since the Second World War, there's a mixture of two different, the understandings or practice or activities of public goods. But in fact, in most cases, I repeat, the main findings from our interviews that all these are controlled by, law or government documents. But you can find, one of our national, president of a national academic association objected to the missions or those of national universities developed by national government. He criticized that, that point, the policy.
Thanks, Futao. That's a very comprehensive and helpful answer. Now, as tends to happen with our webinars, our questions are coming in with a rush right at the end of your part of the session. So I'm going to take 3 or 4 minutes longer for you.
Thank you.
We might have time for Theo Sloger and Celia Whitchurch, but the first question is from Maria Slowey. Maria, can you come in, please? And don't forget to unmute when you do so.
Thank you, Simon, and hello to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Futao, very nice to see you, and thank you for that very interesting presentation. 2 quick interrelated questions. I had the great pleasure to spend time in Nagoya University as a visiting professor in 2018. And there was a major emphasis at a policy level then on gender equality in higher education. And I see this as a topic many other questioners would like to raise with you, which is about the methodology, whether your participants reflect the fact that not many women are in senior positions in universities. And associated with that, I'd like to ask about the relationship of equality issues more generally and conceptions of public good. It sounded as though that didn't really emerge in your interviews. So one of the things that many of us think about and we learn from Japan is the impact of demography and the aging population. And those kind of topics didn't seem to come through in your interviews, or were they interpreted in different ways? Thank you.
And as I mentioned, and because of the limited time, I cannot talk so much and to all the points from our interviews. And as a matter of fact, we published a paper in higher education about the public good of internationalization of higher education. And in that paper, we mentioned the broader background in which there's, for example, decline in the 18-year-old population and some other new challenges facing higher education, especially, the national universities. So, how should I answer? Could you specify your question?
Yes, it's, perhaps to generalize it, it's the relationship between different conceptions of the public good, which are associated with conceptions of social equality. So, for example, the UNESCO Millennium Development Goals, those kind of wider conceptions.
Mm. And in Japan, as I mentioned earlier, and because I just answered Simon's question, I think I haven't mentioned that point. In Japan, since the Second World War, because of impact from the United States, Japan, especially national universities, have played a very important role in providing, I use the phrase democratic and mass higher education for general public. I think this might be one of the points which can be of relevance to your question. And in recent years, because maybe you know the percentage of higher education enrollments in Japan have reached nearly 80% of the 18-year-old population. The role played by national university in providing an equal access to higher education has become not that meaningful. So the central government requested national university to play more important in contribution to the regional development. I use the phrase regional revitalization as a hub of teaching and research. So there's a changing of missions and roles played by a national university, even since the end of the Second World War.
Well, thanks, Futao, and thanks, Maria, for the question. I really regret to say that I think we best move on. Rajani has rejoined us, I'm pleased to say, and we're now up to 25 to 3. So that means we really must move to the second paper in this 2-paper session. Futao's work is available freely. You can access it through the CGHE website, where there's a number of papers listed, number of working papers, and he's also well published in the academic literature. So look out for his contribution to the discussion about the public good, not only in Japan, but in general.
Thank you.
Now at this point, I'd like to bring in Rajani Naidoo and thank her very much for persisting with the connection and for going to another location, I think, to rejoin us. So Rajani, it's over to you, and do leave some time if you can at the end for Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon, and colleagues. If I'm a bit breathless, it's because I've run down 3 streets. to get to a neighbor's house to use their internet in their kitchen. So what I'd like to talk about is the public good of higher education that is beyond Anglo-Saxon conceptions. And I think, as we all know, there is this unspoken belief that insights on how higher education can contribute to the public good travel generally from the north down to the south and across to the east. In our paper, we want to challenge this picture of Anglo-Saxon dominance, and so it was very good to come after the presentation on Japan. First, we present the mechanisms that are deployed to maintain this fiction. And second, we present examples from South Africa and from Colombia on how universities contribute to the public good. While, of course, these countries still have very major challenges, what we would say is that the policy interventions in these countries, nevertheless, open up the space for us to imagine alternatives. Simon Marginson has written very powerfully on how the erosion of the public good, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world in relation to equity, has become eroded. In addition, we would like to highlight the retreat in calling truth to power and the renewed rise of racism and xenophobia within universities. Despite all of these issues, Anglo-Saxon policy recipes hold enormous sway and are transmitted worldwide. This dominance, of course, does not occur naturally. It is fought for and it is defended in a number of ways. First, the intersection of scientific, symbolic, and economic logics of power within the global field of university education channel hierarchy. Rankings, of course, result in even further retrenchment. Second, international organizations and transnational corporations embed neoliberalism materially and through what Cardoso and Steiner-Kamsi have called coercive social construction. Third, the potential of China to introduce new logics of power is likely to be stalled by contemporary politics. Fourth, using Ravens-Connell's work, gestures of exclusion and grand erasure are deployed to undermine the public good innovations that come from the South and from the East. For example, we cannot learn from Cuba's medical school or from Singapore's citizenship education because our focus is fixed on how different their political systems are from ours. Sweden and Norway, which were once hailed as success stories, now face neoliberal challenges. As Peterson and his colleagues show, these countries are now positioned as countries in need of reform. On the other hand, Anglo-Saxon solutions are transferred worldwide. Local problems are re-engineered and squeezed into these templates. In addition, as Jack Lee and I write, far from being passive victims, Southern elites engage in reproducing such patterns, giving weight to Bourdieu's concept of illusio. All of these mechanisms result in such practices becoming deterritorized, depoliticized, and projected with both reach and power to all parts of the world. And why is this a problem? Elite Anglo-Saxon universities are powerful and linked on a global scale. Some of the best critiques of neoliberalism and the defense of the public good of universities emerge from these bastions of privilege. However, while there are many exceptions, in general, what we see emerging is the narrowing of the public good role of universities as a result of their compliance with neoliberal inspired policies, strategies, and practices. It is thus very important to turn for inspiration to initiatives that are not so visible on the world stage because they are not from the USA or the UK or Australia, and they do not feature in rankings. So we turn to South Africa and Colombia as illustrative examples. The scale of conflict and inequality in these countries has created both the most severe challenges, but at the same time, it has created fertile ground for innovation. We turn first to our CGHE project on undergraduate higher education and the public good in South Africa. One of the first things that struck us as researchers was the extent to which the public good in higher education in South Africa is kept alive and government, from student organizations, academics to vice chancellors. We also learned from South African perspectives on the public good from scholars such as Walker, Leibowitz, and Mrove. What was interesting for us was that rather than measuring the quality of teaching by how many hours we teach, or even worse, by looking at graduate salaries, quality is linked in South Africa, at least in principle, to equity. South Africa has extended degree programs and capacity development grants for excellence in teaching. All of these are intended to aid the success of students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. In South Africa, institutional culture is hugely important, as the work of Masuta shows. In addition, there is a concern with epistemic access and justice. For example, Nelson Mandela University has appointed a chair for critical studies in higher education transformation. They have also developed a humanizing pedagogy based on the work of Paulo Freire. The University of Pretoria has incorporated a regional language in their curriculum, and it has included transformational criteria into people management. And what about Colombia? In Colombia, universities have collaborated to play a role in the transition for peace. Jose Restrepo, the past president of one of the oldest and most prestigious universities, and I have written about the development of 5-year research programs that are linked to peace. In addition, universities have brought together formal rebels with the victims of the guerrilla movement. The curriculum has been transformed to include reconciliation and forgiveness. The diverse skills of young people in Colombia who entered the guerrilla movement when they were very, very young and have re-entered society have been incorporated to enrich the curriculum for all students. Of course, such initiatives in both countries face the most immense challenges, and there has been as much failure as success. But we would say, nevertheless, these serve as hugely inspirational. These initiatives keep the spirit of higher education contributing to the public good in practice alive. So we conclude by arguing for the importance of more dynamic and pluralistic understandings of the public good. We need to move beyond the hierarchies of the global field of higher education, which exclude certain forms of learning that do not fit the neoliberal mold. We need to move away from what has been called parochial universalisms. A balance needs to be sought between a universal notion of the public good that works across time and place to one that is anchored in place and entangled in time. Rather than global and political dichotomies of the public good, the knowledge that is actually developed in these very different and interesting encounters could become a potent validation of alternatives to neoliberalism. Thank you.
So fabulous, Rajani, very thought-provoking indeed. Your point about parochial universalism, really well taken. And I think the challenge for us is in looking at the public good around the world, which we're doing, is to try to establish if there are common elements, you know, like academic freedom, perhaps, which we may want to see everywhere, and others which, of course, and perhaps the bulk of them, do vary and are contextualized and should be gently driven rather than driven according to abstract models imposed from hegemonic countries. And it's in that context that I want to ask my question. You know, I mean, this discussion is about models, I think, of the public good and how we construct those and how they work and who owns them and so on. And the COVID-19 pandemic might be giving us a chance to reset some of these discursive agendas. I mean, you look at the track record of the dominant countries, some of them have not done very well, whereas some others have done well. I had a look at the EU website on deaths in the pandemic nation by nation yesterday. I found that only 7 people have perished of COVID-19 in Taiwan, 26 in Singapore, 287 in South Korea. And they're all rich countries with good health systems, but then Vietnam is not a rich country and it doesn't have a strong health system, but there are no recorded deaths. We think that there probably are some somewhere, but there seem to be very, very few cases in Vietnam. And this is a large country, which is fairly transparent. So I think that you know, you have to conclude that these East Asian countries, rich and poor, are doing relatively well in the pandemic period. So there's something about their model which works. And then you look at the US and the UK, and the UK is sitting on 45,000 deaths, and it's going up and up, and everyone's deregulating and going, you know, coming out of the lockdown without any relationship with the death toll at all. And it presumably will make it worse. And in the US, it's even more so. So, you know, the humanist countries, the liberal humanist countries, are not defending human life very well. And they're prioritising kickstarting their economies, and universities are prioritising recruitment of students rather than protection of students' health at the moment as well. So will this give us a chance to reset the agenda, do you think?
I think it does give us a chance to reset the agenda. And I think there's a little blip in, let's say, Anglo-Saxon models of capitalism, the countries that really push that form of capitalism forward, in that suddenly humanity is threatened, rich and poor. And that's kind of leveling, because people then wonder and think about how to collaborate for the greater good, but only up to a certain extent. When we look at the people in Britain that are really struggling both economically as well as in terms of health with COVID, those patterns are very, very uneven. So I think there'll be a little bit of a blip, but it will go back to business as normal. And I think there's this whole rhetoric of choice and freedom. And for me, what that is all about is the state offshoring responsibility. It's basically saying, you know, it's up to you. You have the freedom to make the choice. And whatever happens to you, it's your responsibility, and you face the consequences. And I think that's a very powerful argument that a lot of people buy into, and it's very, very problematic. So I think there'll be a shift, but I don't think it'll be a major transformation.
Yes, the problem becomes to democratise the public good, but in those countries which are not allowing it to be democratised, they're not carrying out responsible public good policy either. So this creates a vacuum, and you would think that that is a space in which change can occur. I'm going to invite Jenny Case at this point to come in. Jenny, can you unmute and ask your question?
So hi, Rajani, and thanks so much, and especially for sprinting to the neighbour's kitchen. It was so good to get your talk. And I mean, what a huge platform you're speaking from, and I really appreciate the comparative examples that you're pulling in, those perspectives. And so it's really like a tiny, my question feels a bit marginal. I did put a comment in the chat. I'm trying to think about what we lose and what we gain when we use this umbrella Anglo-Saxon. And I am coming from the perspective of sort of being in one part of that and then crossing the ocean to live in another part of what could be under that umbrella. So I'm completely with you around neoliberal politics and academic publishing, rankings, all that. It makes a lot of sense to put those two systems together. But, my own interest is around student access to higher education. And there, the US has a completely different model of how that works. And I don't want to sound like I'm, trying to be what sort of necessarily advocate for that. But I just think it's actually almost in many respects diametrically opposed to the assumptions that we have in, if I could call it the British system, but it really runs through the British Commonwealth and of course the South African system that you and I are part of as well. And the US is just not hung up about transfer, for example. Half of university students start in community college. In the locality I live in, community college is free. There is a surprising, not a stigma. I mean, again, I'm not at Harvard or something, but in regular mid-level good 4-year schools, there's not a stigma about students transferring. I don't want to say it's not. I'm just thinking, actually, there are different models. What interests me is that China, in looking to expand its system, is arguably more influenced presently by the US than the UK type systems. I don't know. Sorry, this is a whole big question. So I'm just really asking, if we're thinking about student access and massification, then I do think there are actually quite different systems within that Anglo-Saxon umbrella, and arguably the UK post-school, highly elite, very academically focused system is the less desirable one if you're looking at that metric. Just throwing that out. Interesting.
Yep, thank you. That's a very good point. And I suppose I use the term Anglo-Saxon as a shorthand way to talk about the mode of capitalism, to talk about deregulation, to talk about the way in which the market works. And you're quite right, there are different types and forms of access in the UK and the USA. But I think even the community colleges, I know, you've probably read The Diverted Dream by Carol and Halsey. And I think
I don't mean to romanticize that, for sure.
And that's become that was written quite a long time ago. But when you look at some of the figures now and the transfer and what's happening to the community colleges, there seems to be that sort of trend as well. So what Carol and Halsey were talking about seems to be on the rise. And the kind of, I suppose the commonality would be the stratification as well, in terms of if you look at a country the way Germany used to be in terms of much more flatter higher education system compared to Britain and the USA, you could see a divergence there. But at the same time, if we go really deep into each country, there will be those sorts of differences in terms of access and success as well.
Thanks, Rajani.
Thanks to Jenny and Rajani. I'd like to bring in Lynn Nguyen at this stage. Lynn, are you there?
Yes, Simon, thank you. Thank you for giving me the time, and thank you, Rajani, for the very thought-provoking presentation. I am Lynn Nguyen from Monash University, and I would like to have the question about the role of the public intellectuals in shaping the discourses on how we can and how we should conceptualize the public good in this modern time. As you mentioned about the relation between the public good and Bourdieu's illusion, and so I just wonder how can public intellectuals can help shaping the discourse on the public good, and whether in this modern time, are they still alive, the public intellectuals, or are they still alive, or
I can't. I'm sorry, my connection is. I didn't quite hear large parts of what you said. Sorry, my connection is coming and going here as well. And
it's all fine, Rajani. I think we just ask Lynn to repeat it and see how we go the second time.
Sorry, Lynn.
Sorry for that. So my question is that as you mentioned that the public good and Bourdieu's illusion, so I just wonder, could you please comment on the role of the public intellectuals in shaping the discourses around how we can and how we should conceptualize the public good in this modern time?
Okay, thank you. And I suppose when I was talking about illusio, I was talking about how even for southern universities that have no hope of doing well in these kind of in the global field of higher education, according to the capitals and the struggles and the logics of power, how they nevertheless still play the game. It's so visceral, it's so much a part. So they in these hierarchies, which only take them a short space up, but nevertheless the claims and the stakes are moved out of the game to actually withdraw. Have done in many countries. And I think we kind of are missing in some of our discourses the really important work that's happening in Latin America, this Islamic Renaissance on community, the Confucius, the work that's based on Confucius and so on. And I think it would be really
Colleagues, we've struggled today with our connections and do apologise to everyone. You know how it is. And I'm just pleased that we haven't had these problems in every webinar. We've had them twice. Thanks for your patience. And I think we've lost Rajani, is that right? Yeah. We've come to the end of the webinar's timing anyway. I was going to bring in one more.
And much more exciting.
It's a struggle, isn't it? Was going to bring in David McCarty, but David, I think that it's too much of a struggle to try and get a Q&A at this point of time with Rajani's connection being what it is. So can we ask you to use the chat as you already have and ask Rajani to answer? I'll ask Rajani to answer you there. I'm pleased to say that we resume again on Thursday, hopefully with less connection difficulties. And our topic for Thursday's webinar, which will be chaired by Claire Callender, is can we widen participation in higher education during the COVID-19 pandemic? I have Stephen Desjardins from the University of Michigan, Peter Scott, the Commissioner for Fair Access in Scotland, and my colleague Pedro Teixeira from CPES in Portugal. So we look forward to speaking and seeing you and hearing you all again then, and thank you for joining the webinar today.